Hi. Mostly to Weedy because I know Weedy's in the chat, but hi to anybody else who's here. Hello. It's you, and it's good to see you. I always like seeing you around. Honestly, you are probably definitely in the top 5, and I appreciate that so much. Because you're one of my bestest friends. So that's really neat. Alright. So we are on chapter 5 of Alice in Wonderland. And I'm going to do the same thing that I did last time and let speech to text help me with some subtitles. So I hope you enjoy. Okay, so let us move over to the screen. Yep, okay. And I love it. This was the exact purpose why I wanted my little note panels, so there it is. So you don't see anything you don't need to see. I love it. It looks so good. Anywho. Let me just go back into this and get the dictate going. And get on with chapter 5. What's it actually? Here we go. Testing 1, 2. Alright, seems like we're good. Chapter 5. Advice from a Caterpillar. The caterpillar and Alice looked at each other for some time in silence. At last the caterpillar took a hookah out of its mouth and addressed her in a languid, sleepy voice. "Who are you?" said the caterpillar. This was not an encouraging opening for a conversation. Alice replied rather shyly, I hardly know, sir, just at present. At least I know who I was when I got up this morning, but I think I might have been changed several times since then." "What do you mean by that?" said the caterpillar sternly. "Explain yourself." "I can't explain myself, I'm afraid, sir," said Alice, "because I'm not myself, you see." "I don't see," said the caterpillar. "I'm afraid I can't put it more clearly," Alice replied very politely, "for I can't understand it myself to begin with. And being so many different sizes in a day is all very confusing." "It isn't," said the caterpillar. "Well, perhaps you haven't found it so yet," said Alice. "But when you have much to turn into a chrysalis, when you have to turn into a chrysalis, you will—" Turning the page. "Someday, you know. And then, after that into a butterfly. I think you should feel a little queer, don't you?" "Not a bit," said the caterpillar. "Well, perhaps your feelings may be different," said Alice. All I know is it would feel very queer to me." "You," said the caterpillar contemptuously. "Who are you?" Which brought them back again to the beginning of the conversation. Alice felt a little irritated at the caterpillar's making such very short remarks, and she drew herself up and said, very gravely, "I think you ought to tell me who you are first." "Why?" said the caterpillar. There was another puzzling question. And, as Alice could not think of any good reason, and the caterpillar seemed to be in a very unpleasant state of mind, she turned away. "Come back," said the caterpillar, calling after her. "I've something important to say." This sounded promising. Certainly Alice turned back and came back again. "Keep your temper," said the caterpillar. "Is that all?" said Alice, swallowing down her anger as well as she could. "No," said the caterpillar. Alice thought she might as well wait, as she had nothing else to do. Perhaps, after all, it might tell her something worth hearing. For some minutes, it puffed away without speaking. But at last it unfolded its arms, took the hookah out of its mouth again, and said, "So you think you've changed, do you?" "I'm afraid I am, sir. I can't remember things as I used to, and I don't keep the same size for 10 minutes together." "Can't remember what things?" said the caterpillar. "Well, I've tried to say how doth the little busy bee, but it came out all different." Alice replied in a very melancholy voice. "Repeat, you are old Father William," said the caterpillar. Alice folded her hands and began. "You are old, Father William," the young man said, "and your hair has become very white. And yet you incessantly stand on your head. Do you think at your age that is right?" "In my youth," Father William replied to his son, "I feared I might injure the brain. But now that I'm perfectly sure I have none, why, I'll do it again and again." "You are old," said the youth, "as I mentioned before, and have grown most uncommonly fat. Yet you turn back to somersault in and out the door. Pray, what's the reason for that?" "In my youth," said the sage, as he shook his grey locks, "I kept all my limbs very supple. But to use of this ointment, 1 shilling the box. Allow me to sell you a couple." "You are old," said the youth, "and your jaws are too weak for anything together that then suet. It's Suet. Yet you finished the goose with the bones and the beak. Pray, how did you manage to do it?" "In my youth," said his father, "I took to the law, and argued each case with my wife. And as the muscle strength which gave it to my jaw, he has lasted the rest of my life." "You are old," said the youth. "One could hardly suppose that your eye would be as steady as ever. Yet you balanced an eel on the end of your nose. What made you so awfully clever?" "I have answered 3 questions, and that is enough," said his father. "Don't give yourself airs. Do you think I can listen to all day to such stuff? Be off, or I'll kick you down the stairs." "That's not right," said the caterpillar. "Not quite right, I'm afraid," Alice said timidly. "Some of the words have got altered." Okay, tangent. So, all of the poems and such are parodies of actual poems that the little children would have learned in school. Uh, the annotated Alice goes into the original Victorian era poems, but this version that I'm reading from doesn't have them. But a lot of the bits of poetry are parodies of other bits of poetry. "It is all wrong from the beginning to end," said the caterpillar decidedly, and then there was silence for some minutes. The caterpillar was the first to speak. "What size do you want to be?" it asked. "Oh, I'm not particular as to size," Alice hastily replied. "One only doesn't change so often, you know." "I don't know," said the caterpillar. Alice said nothing, as she had never been so much contradicted in all her life before, and she felt that she was losing her temper. "Are you content now?" said the caterpillar. "Well, I should like to be a little larger, sir, if you wouldn't mind," said Alice. 3 inches is such a wretched height to be." "It's a very good height indeed," said the caterpillar, angrily rearing itself up as it spoke. It was exactly 3 inches high. "But I'm not used to it," pleaded poor Alice in all the piteous tone, and she thought herself, "I wish the creatures wouldn't be so easily offended." "You'll get used to it in time," said the caterpillar, and it put its hookah into its mouth and began smoking again. This time Alice waited patiently until it closed, chose to speak again. In a minute or two, the caterpillar took the hookah out of its mouth and yawned once or twice, and shook itself. Then it got off the mushroom and crawled away onto the grass, merely remarking as it went, "One side will make you grow taller, and the other side will make you grow shorter." One side of what? The other side of what? Thought Alice to herself. "Of the mushrooms," said the caterpillar, just as she had asked it aloud. and in another moment it was out of sight. Alice remained looking thoughtfully at the mushroom for a minute, trying to make out which of the two sides it was. As it was perfectly round, she found this was a very difficult question. However, at last she stretched out her arm around it as far as it would go, and broke off a bit of the edge with each hand. And now which is which? She said to herself, and nibbled a little of the right hand bit to try the effect. The next moment she felt a violent blow underneath her chin, as it had struck her foot. She was a good deal frightened by this sudden change, but she felt that there was no time to be lost, as she was shrinking rapidly. So she set to work at once to eat some of the other bit. Her chin was pressed so closely against her foot that it was hardly room to open her mouth. But she did at last manage to swallow a morsel of the left bit. "Come, my head's free at last," said Alice in a tone of delight, which changed into alarm in another moment when she found that her shoulders were nowhere to be found. All she could see, when she looked down, was an immense length of neck which seemed to rise like a stalk out of the sea of green leaves that lay far below her. "What can all that green stuff be?" said Alice. "And where have my shoulders gone to? And oh, my poor hands! How is it I can't see you?" She was moving about as she spoke, but no result seemed to follow, except a little shaking among the distant green leaves. As there seemed to be no chance of getting her hands up to her head, she tried to get her head down to them, and was delighted to find that her neck would bend about as easily in any direction, like a serpent. That's not terrifying at all. She had just succeeded in curving it down into a graceful zigzag, and was going to dive in among the leaves, for which she found but nothing but the tops of the trees under which she had been wandering, when a sharp hiss made her draw back in a hurry. A large pigeon had flown into her face, and was beating her violently with its wings. "Serpent!" screamed that pigeon. "I'm not a serpent," Alice said indignantly. "Let me alone." "Serpent, I say again," repeated the pigeon, but in a more subdued tone, and added, with a kind of sob, "I've tried every way, but nothing seems to suit them." "I haven't the least idea what you're talking about," said Alice. "I've tried the roots of trees, I've tried banks, I've tried hedges," the pigeon went on without attending to her, "but those serpents, there's no placing them." Alice was more and more puzzled, but she thought there was no use in saying anything more till the pigeon had finished. "And if that wasn't enough trouble hatching the eggs," said the pigeon, "but I must be on the lookout for serpents night and day. Why, I haven't had a wink of sleep these 3 weeks." "I'm very sorry you've been annoyed," Alice, who was beginning to see its meaning. "And just as I'd taken to the highest tree of the wood," continued the pigeon, raising its voice to a shriek, "that's just what I was thinking. I should be free of them at last. They must needs free of them at last. They must needs come wiggling down from the sky. Ugh, serpent! That was a weird sentence." "But I'm not a serpent, I tell you," said Alice. I'm a, well, what are you?" said the pigeon. "I, I can see you're trying to invent something." "I, I'm a little girl," said Alice rather doubtfully, as she remembered the number of changes she'd gone through that day. "A likely story indeed," said the pigeon in a tone of deepest contempt. "I've seen a good many little girls in my time, but never one with such a neck as that. No, no, you're a serpent. There's no use denying it. I suppose you'll tell me next that you've never tasted an egg." "I have tasted eggs, certainly," said Alice, who was a very truthful child. "But little girls eat eggs quite as much as serpents do, you know." "I don't believe it," said the pigeon. "But if they do, why are they the kind of serpent why are they then they're a kind of serpent, that's all I can say." This was such a new idea to Alice, she was quite silent for a minute or two, which gave the pigeon the opportunity of adding, "You're looking for eggs, I know that well enough." "And what does it matter to me whether you're a little girl or a serpent?" "It matters a good deal to me," said Alice hastily. but I'm not looking for eggs, as it happens. And if I was, I shouldn't want yours. I don't like them raw. Well, be off then, said the pigeon in a sulky voice. As it had settled down again into its nest, Alice crouched down among the trees as well as she could, for her neck kept getting entangled along the branches every now and again, and she had to stop it and untwist it. After a while, she remembered that she still held a piece of the mushroom in her hands, and set to work very carefully, nibbling first at one, then at the other, growing sometimes taller and sometimes shorter, until she succeeded in bringing herself down to her usual height. It was so long since she'd been anything near the right size that it felt quite strange at first, but she got used to it in a few minutes and began talking to herself as usual. Come, there's half my plan done now. How puzzling all these changes are. I'm never quite sure what I'm going to be from one minute to another. However, I've gotten back to my right size. The next thing to do is go into that beautiful garden. How is that to be done, I wonder? As she said this, she came suddenly to an open place, with a little house. It was about 4 feet high. Who lives there? Thought Alice. It'll never do to come upon them this size. Why should frighten them out of their wits? She began nibbling at the right side of her hand again, and did not venture to go near the house till she had brought herself down to 9 inches high. All right, so that is the end of chapter 5, and I'm going to take a drink and check on chat. Good. I do love that my subtitles with my sizing of my font is like you have dictated 154 pages. No, it's just so people can see. Oh wait, get back here. Oi, where did you go? Hold on. Where did you go? Where did you go? Get back to the thing. Where did you go? Oh, you silly thing. Hold on. Technical difficulties. Hooray! Are we good? Are we good? Okay. Seems like we're all right. Excuse me. Let us continue. Chapter 6. Pig and Pepper. For a minute or two she stood looking at the house and wondering what to do next, when suddenly a footman in livery came running out of the woods. She considered him to be a footman because he was in livery. Otherwise, judging by his face only, she would have called him a fish, and rapped loudly at the door with his knuckles. It was opened by another footman in livery, with a round face and large eyes like a frog. And both footmen, Alice noticed, had powdered hair curled all over their heads. She felt very curious to know what it was all about, and crept a little way out of the wood to listen. The fish footman began producing from under his arm a great letter nearly as large as himself, and he handed this over to the other, saying in a solemn tone, "For the Duchess, an invitation from the Queen to play croquet." The frog footman repeated, in the same solemn tone, only changing the order of the words a little, "From the Queen, an invitation for the Duchess to play croquet." And then they both bowed low, and their curls got entangled together. Alice laughed so much at this that she had to run back into the woods for fear of them hearing her, and when she next peeped out, the fish footman was gone, and the other was sitting on the ground near the door, staring stupidly into the sky. Alice went timidly up to the door and knocked. "There's no sort of use in knocking," said the footman, "and for and that's for two reasons. First, because I'm on the same side of the door as you are, and secondly, because they're making such a noise inside, nobody could possibly hear you." And certainly there was a most extraordinary noise going on within, a constant howling and sneezing, and every now and again there was a great crash, as if a dish or kettle had been broken into pieces. "Please, then," said Alice, "how am I going to get in?" "There might be some sense in you knocking," said the footman. When The footman went on without attending to her. "If we had the door between us, for instance, and you were inside, and you might knock, and I could let you out, and you would know." He was looking up at the sky all the time he was speaking, and this Alice thought decidedly uncivil. "But perhaps he can't help it," she said to herself. "His eyes are so very near the top of his head. But at any rate, he might answer questions. How am I to get in?" she repeated aloud. "I shall sit here," said the footman remarked, "till tomorrow." At this moment the door of the house opened, and a large plate came skimmering out, straight at the footman's head. It had just grazed his nose, and broken to pieces against one of the trees behind him. "Or the next day, maybe," the footman continued in the same tone, exactly as if nothing had happened. "How am I to get in?" asked Alice again, in a louder tone. "Are you going to get in at all?" said the footman. "That's the first question, you know." It was no doubt only Alice didn't like to be told so. "It's really dreadful," she muttered to herself. "The way all the creatures argue, it's enough to drive one crazy." The footman seemed to think that this was a good opportunity for repeating his remark, with variations. "I shall sit here," he said, "on and off for days and days." "But what am I to do?" said Alice. "Anything you like," said the footman, and began whistling. "Oh, there's no use talking to him," said Alice desperately. "He's perfectly idiotic." And she opened the door and went in. The door led right to a large kitchen, which was full of smoke from one end to the other. The Duchess was sitting there on a three-legged stool in the middle, nursing a baby. The cook was leaning over the fire, stirring a large cauldron which seemed to be full of soup. "There's certainly too much pepper in that soup," said Alice to herself, as well as she could for sneezing. There certainly was too much of it in the air. Even the Duchess sneezed occasionally. And as for the baby, it was sneezing and howling alternatively without a moment's pause. The only two creatures in the kitchen that did not sneeze were the cook and the large cat, which was lying on the hearth and grinning from ear to ear. "Please, would you tell me?" said Alice a little timidly, for she was not quite sure whether it was a good whether it was good manners for her to speak first. Okay, what just happened? Who is the lovely who did something? Lily! Thank you for the resub! Aw, thank you so much. I hope you are too. I hope you are doing so well, because that's all I ever wished for you. But yeah, thank you for popping in. Oh, hello, hello. I don't believe we've met. It's good to see you. But yeah, seriously, same. Any friend of Wheaties is a friend of mine. Oh, that's lovely. I'm so glad. Alright, how we doing on? Okay, resuming. Wait, come back here. I didn't ask you to do that. Okay. Fun with the window. Please, would you tell me, said Alice a little timidly. Yeah, blah, blah, blah. Why, manners for her to speak first, why your cat grins like that? It's a Cheshire cat, said the Duchess, and that's why, pig. She said the last word with such sudden violence that Alice quite jumped, but she saw another moment that it was addressed to the baby and not to her, so she took courage and went on again. I don't know why a treasure. Bleh. I didn't know that Cheshire cats always grinned. In fact, I didn't know cats could grin. They all can, said the Duchess, and most of 'em do. I don't know of any that do, said Alice very politely, feeling quite pleased to have gotten into a conversation. You don't know much, said the Duchess, and that's a fact. Alice did not at all like the tone of that remark, and thought it would be as well to introduce some other subject of conversation. While she was trying to fix on one, the cook took the cauldron of soup off the fire and at once set to work throwing everything within her reach at the Duchess and the baby. The fire irons came first, then followed by a shower of saucepans, plates, and dishes. The Duchess took no notice of them, even when they hit her, and the baby was howling so much already that it was quite impossible to say whether the blows hurt or not. Oh, please mind what you're doing, cried Alice, jumping up and down in agony and terror. Oh, there goes his precious nose! As an unusually large saucepan flew close by it and very nearly carried it off. If everybody minded their own business, said the Duchess in a hoarse growl, the world would go round a deal faster than it does. Which would not be an advantage, said Alice, who felt very glad for an opportunity of showing off a little of her knowledge. Just think of what work it would make for the day and the night. You see, the Earth takes 24 hours round to turn around on its axis. Talking of axes, meaning AXIS versus AXES, said the Duchess. Chop off her head. Alice glanced rather anxiously at the cook to see if she meant to take the hint, but the cook was busily stirring the soup and seemed to be not listening, so she went on again. 24 hours, I think. Or is it 12? Oh, don't bother me, said the Duchess. I never could abide figures. Lol, neither could I. And when she began nursing her child again, singing a sort of soft lullaby as she did so, and giving it a violent shaking at the end of every line. Speak roughly to your little boy, and beat him when he sneezes. He only does it to annoy, because he knows it teases. Chorus, in which the cook and the baby joined. Wow, wow, wow. While the Duchess sang the second verse of the song, she kept tossing the baby violently up and down, and the poor little thing howled so that Alice could hardly hear the words. I speak severely to my boy, and beat him when he sneezes, for he can thoroughly enjoy the pepper when he pleases. Here, you may nurse it for a bit, if you like, the Duchess said, to Alice, flinging the baby at her as she spoke. "I must go and get ready to play croquet with the Queen." And she hurried out of the room. The cook threw a frying pan after her after she went, but it just missed her. Alice caught the baby with some difficulty, as it was a queer-shaped little creature, and held out its arms and legs in all different directions. "Just like a starfish," thought Alice. The poor little thing was snorting like a steam engine when she caught it, and kept doubling itself up and straightening itself out again, so that it was altogether for the first minute or two. It was as much as she could do to hold it. As soon as she had made out the proper way of nursing it, which was to twist it up into some sort of knot, and then keep a tight hold of its right ear and left foot, so as to prevent it from undoing itself, she carried it out into the open air. "If I don't take this child away with me," thought Alice, "they're sure to kill it in a day or two. Wouldn't it be murder to leave it behind?" She said the last word out loud, and the little thing grunted in reply. It had left off the sneezing for this time. "Don't grunt," said Alice. That's not at all a proper way to express yourself." The baby grunted again, and Alice looked very anxious into its face to see what was the matter with it. There could no doubt be that it was a very turned-up nose, much like a snout than a real nose. Also, its eyes were getting extremely small for a baby altogether. Alice did not like the look of the thing at all. But perhaps it's only sobbing, she thought as she looked into its eyes again, to see if there were any tears. No, there were no tears. "If you're going to turn into a pig, my dear," said Alice seriously, "I'll have nothing more to do with you. Mind now." The poor little thing sobbed again, or grunted. It was impossible to say which. And they went on for some time in silence. Alice was beginning to think to herself, "Now what am I going to do with this creature when I get it home?" when it grunted violently again. So violently that she looked down into its face with some alarm. This time, there could be no mistake about it. It was neither more nor less than a pig, and she felt it would be quite absurd for her to carry it any further. So she set the little creature down, and felt quite relieved to see it trot away quietly into the wood. "If it had grown up," she said to herself, "it would have made a dreadfully ugly child, but it makes a rather handsome pig, I think." And she began thinking over the other children she knew who might do very well as pigs, and was just saying to herself, "If one only knew the right way to change them," when she was a little startled by seeing the Cheshire Cat sitting on the bough of a tree a few yards off. The cat only grinned when it saw Alice. It looked good-natured, she thought, and still it had very long claws and a great many teeth, so she felt that it ought to be treated with respect. "Cheshire Puss," she began rather timidly, as she did not at all know whether it would like the name. However, it only grinned a little wider. "Come, it's pleased so far," thought Alice as she went on. "Would you tell me, please, which way I ought to go from here?" "That depends a good deal on where you want to go to," said the cat. "I don't care much where," said Alice. "Then it doesn't matter which way you go," said the cat. "So long as I get somewhere," Alice added as an explanation. "Oh, you're sure to do that," said the cat, "if only you walk long enough." Alice felt this could not be denied. So she tried another question. "What sort of people live about here?" Here is one of the most famous exchanges in the book. "In that direction," the cat said, waving its right paw round, "lives a hatter, and in that direction," waving its other paw, "lives a March hare. Visit either you like. They're both mad." "But I don't want to go among mad people," Alice remarked. "Oh, you can't help that," said the cat. "We're all mad here. I'm mad. You're mad." "How do you know I'm mad?" said Alice. "You must be," said the cat, "or you wouldn't have come here." Alice didn't think that proved it at all, however. She went on. And how do you know that you're mad? To begin with, said the cat, a dog's not mad. You grant that? I suppose so, said Alice. Well then, the cat went on. You see, a dog growls when it's angry and wags its tail when it's pleased. Now, I growl when I'm pleased and wag my tail if I'm angry. Therefore, I'm mad. That's just general cat communication. I call it purring, not growling. Call it what you like, said the cat. Do you play croquet with the queen today? I should like it very much, said Alice, but I haven't been invited yet. You'll see me there, said the cat, and vanished. Alice was not much surprised at this. She was getting so well used to queer things happening. While she was still looking at the place where it had suddenly appeared again. By the by, what became of the baby? Said the cat. I'd nearly forgotten to ask. It turned into a pig, Alice answered very quietly, just as if the cat had come back in a natural way. I thought it would, said the cat, and vanished again. Alice waited a little, half expecting to see it again, but it did not appear, and after a minute or two, she walked into the direction in which the March Hare was said to live. I've seen hatters before, she said to herself. The March Hare would be much more interesting, and perhaps, as this is May, it won't be raving mad, referring to the breeding season of hares. At least, not so mad as it was in March. As she said this, she looked up, and there was the cat again, sitting on the branch of a tree. Did you say pig or fig? Said the cat. I said pig, replied Alice, and I wish you wouldn't keep appearing and vanishing so suddenly. You'd make one quite giddy. All right, said the cat, and this time it vanished quite slowly, beginning with the end of its tail and ending with the grin, which remained some time after the rest had gone. Well, I'd often seen a cat without a grin, thought Alice, but a grin without a cat. That's the most curious thing I ever saw in all my life. She had not gone much further before she came out of in sight of the house of the March Hare. She thought it must be the right house because the chimneys were shaped like ears and the roof was thatched with fur. That's not wow. Can hmm? Anyway, it's thatched with fur. It was so large a house that she didn't need to go near. She didn't need. She did not like to go nearer till she had nibbled some of the left-hand bit of the mushroom and raised herself up about 2 feet high, even though she walked up towards rather timidly, saying to herself, Suppose it should be raving mad after all. I almost wish I'd gone to see the Hatter instead. Thank you for the check, Liv. I'll do that now. And hi, Nero! I always wave, even if you can't see me waving. Thank you for the lurk, Liv. Alright. Wow, I'm gonna go through this water. Let's see, we're on chapter 7 out of 12. So, let's do 2 more chapters. Let's stop at chapter 10. Yeah. Compliments for Weedy. Oh, ads. Well, Hey, Weedy. I think you're great. And I want you to be happy. And I'm really, really proud of you because you did really well on that paper. And you told me you passed some of your other classes, which is really good. And I think you're gonna go far. And you're such a sweetheart. And I'm so glad you're my friend. And I will say that every time because I really am glad you're my friend. Mm. But I'll wait just in case you missed it. We'll do a little recap. Wait, how many ads are there? Okay. Where's the window? Where's the window? There we go. Okay. Up. All right. Nope. Okay. It doesn't like it when I. Oh, well, I complimented you. I said. I said that I was proud of you, and I was glad you passed your classes, and that you're a sweetheart, and I'm glad you're my friend, and I want you to be happy. Okay. Let us resume. Chapter 7 At Tea Party.
Muxie 4 Habbit.
Thank you. There was a table set out under a tree in front of the house, and the March Hare and the Hatter were having tea at it.
Muxie 1 ASKJDFSADKJHKDSAVCNXKDJFH Akia Ra Wira Diad EU Arif EU Ru FASDADFSFAVCXVVCXVCXIVCXVCX Erner WCNFIOSDFENRNJESFN DJs AU AU AU.
You nerd. Well, that's okay. You're silly. I don't mind at all. A dormouse was sitting between them, fast asleep, and the other two were using it as a cushion, resting their elbows on it, and talking over its head. Very uncomfortable for the dormouse, thought Alice. So, dormice were a legitimate pet in the Victorian era, and one of the places they were kept, they could be kept in teapots. So that was a real thing. Very uncomfortable for the dormouse, thought Alice. Only it's asleep. I suppose it doesn't mind. The table was a large one, but the three were all crowded together at one corner of it. No room, no room, they cried out when they all saw Alice coming. There's plenty of room, said Alice indignantly as she sat down at one of the large armchairs at the end of the table. Have some wine, said the March Hare in an encouraging tone. Alice looked around the table. There was nothing on it but tea. I don't see any wine, she remarked. There isn't any, said the March Hare. And that wasn't very civil of you to offer it, said Alice angrily. It wasn't very civil of you to sit down without being invited, said the March Hare. I didn't know it was your table, said Alice. It's laid for a great many more than just three. Your hair wants cutting, said the Hatter. He had been looking at Alice for some time with great curiosity, and this was his first speech. I will say this, the residents of Wonderland are very cutting with their remarks. You should learn not to make personal remarks, Alice said with some severity. It's very rude. The Hatter opened his eyes wide on hearing this, but all he said was, Why is the raven like the writing desk? Come, we shall have some fun now, thought Alice. I'm glad they begun asking riddles. I believe I can guess that, she added aloud. Do you mean that you think you can find out the answer to it? Said the March Hare. Exactly so, said Alice. Then you should say what you mean, the March Hare went on. I do, Alice hastily replied. At least, I mean what I say. That's the same thing, you know. Not the same thing a bit, said the Hatter. Why, you might just say as well that I see what I eat is the same thing as I eat what I see. You might just as well say, added the March Hare, that I like what I get is the same thing as I get what I like. You might just as well say, added the Dormouse, which seemed to be talking in its sleep, that I breathe when I sleep is the same thing as I sleep when I breathe. That is the same thing with you, said the Hatter. And here the conversation dropped, and the party sat still silent for a moment, while Alice thought overall she could remember about ravens and writing desks, which wasn't much. The Hatter was the first to break the silence. What day of the month is it? He asked, turning to Alice as he had taken the watch out of his pocket and was looking at it unsteadily, uneasily shaking it every now and again, and holding it to its ear. Alice considered a little, then said, The 4th. 2 days wrong, thought the Hatter. I told you butter butter wouldn't suit the works, he added, looking angrily at the March Hare. It's the best butter, the March Hare replied meekly. Yes, but some crumbs might have gotten into it as well, the Hatter grumbled. You shouldn't have put it on with the bread knife. The March Hare took the watch and looked at it gloomily. Then he dipped it into a cup of tea and looked at it again, but could think of nothing better to say than his first remark. It was the best butter, you know. Alice had been looking over his shoulder with some curiosity. What a funny watch, she remarked. Tells the day of the month and doesn't tell what o'clock it is. Why should it? Muttered the Hatter. Does your watch tell you what year it is? Of course not, Alice replied very readily. But that's because it stays on the same year for such a long time together. Which is just the case with mine, said the Hatter. Alice felt dreadfully puzzled. The Hatter's remark seemed to have had no sort of meaning in it, and yet it was certainly English. I don't quite understand you, Alice said politely as she could. The Dormouse is asleep again, said the Hatter, and he poured a little hot tea upon its nose. The Dormouse shook its head impatiently and said without opening its eyes, Of course, just what I had to remark myself. Have you guessed the riddle yet? The Hatter said, turning to Alice again. No, I give it up. What's the answer? I haven't the slightest idea, said the Hatter. Nor I, said the March Hare. Alice sighed wearily. I think you might do something better with the time, she said, than wasting it on asking riddles that have no answers. So, fun fact, a couple of authors have come up with solutions for the riddle. One of which was Edgar Allan Poe. And I just find that really amusing. And I believe the answer was something along the lines of, I can't remember the first part, but they both scribble a few notes. Yeah, it is absolutely unethical. A lot of things in the Victorian era were interesting. If you knew time as well as I do, said the Hatter, you wouldn't talk about wasting it. It's him. I don't know what you mean, said Alice. Of course you don't, the Hatter said, tossing his head contemptuously. I dare say you never even spoke to time. Perhaps not, Alice cautiously replied, but I know I have to beat time when I learn music. Ah, that accounts for it, said the Hatter. He won't stand beating. Now, if you could only keep on good terms with him, he'd do almost anything you'd like with the clock. For instance, suppose it was 9 o'clock in the morning, just time to begin lessons. You'd only have to whisper a hint to time, and round goes the clock into a twinkling. 1:30, time for dinner. I only wish it was, the March Hare said to itself in a whisper. That would be grand, certainly, said Alice, thoughtfully. But then, I shouldn't be hungry for it, you know. Not at first, perhaps, said the Hatter, but you could keep it to 1:30 for as long as you liked. Is that the way you manage? Alice asked. The Hatter shook his head mournfully. Not I, he replied. We quarreled last March, just before he went mad, you know, pointing to his teaspoon at the March Hare. It was a great concert given to the Queen of Hearts, and I had to sing. Twinkle, twinkle, little bat, how I wonder where you're at. You know the song, perhaps? I've heard something like it, said Alice. It goes on, you know, the Hatter continued in this way. Up upon the world you fly, like a tea tray in the sky. Twinkle, twinkle. Here the dormouse shook itself and began singing in its sleep. Twinkle, 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 twinkle. And then went on so long they had to pitch it to make it stop. Well, I'd hardly finished the first verse, said the Hatter, when the Queen bawled out, He's murdering the time! Off with his head! How dreadfully savage! Exclaimed Alice. And ever since that, the Hatter went on, in a mournful tone, he won't do anything I ask. It's always 6 o'clock now. A bright idea came into Alice's head. Is that the reason so many tea things are put out here? She asked. Yes, that's it, said the Hatter with a sigh. It's always tea time. If we've no time to wash things between whiles, then you keep moving round, I suppose. Exactly so, said the Hatter, as things get used up. But what happens when you come to the beginning again? Alice ventured to ask. Suppose we change the subject, said the March Hare, interrupted, yawning. I'm getting tired of this. I vote the young lady tells us a story. I'm afraid I don't know one, said Alice, rather alarmed at the proposal. Then the Dormouse shall, they both cried. Wake up, Dormouse! And they pinched it on both sides at once. The Dormouse slowly opened its eyes. I wasn't asleep, it said in a hoarse, feeble voice. I heard every word you fellows were saying. Tell us a story, said the March Hare. Yes, please do, pleaded Alice. And be quick about it, added the Hatter, or you'll be asleep again before it's done. Once upon a time there were 3 sisters, the Dormouse began in a great hurry, and their names were Elsie, Lacy, and Tilly, and they lived at the bottom of a well. What did they live on? Said Alice, who always took great interest in questions of eating and drinking. They lived on treacle, said the Dormouse, after thinking for a minute or two. They couldn't have done that, you know, Alice gently remarked. They'd have been ill. So they were, said the Dormouse, very ill. Alice tried a little to fancy herself what such an extraordinary way of living would be like, but it puzzled her too much, and she went on, But why did they live at the bottom of the well? Take some more tea, said the March Hare to Alice very earnestly. I've had nothing yet, Alice replied, in an offended tone, so I can't take more. You mean you can't take less, said the Hatter. It's very easy to take more than nothing. Nobody asked your opinion, said Alice. Who's making personal remarks now? The Hatter asked triumphantly. Alice did not quite know what to say to this, so she helped herself to some tea and bread and butter, and then turned to the Dormouse to repeat her question. Why did they live at the bottom of a well? The Dormouse again took a minute or two to think about it, and then said, It was a treacle well. There's no such thing, Alice began very angrily, but the Hatter and the March Hare went, Shh, shh, and the Dormouse sulkily remarked, If you can't be civil, you'd better finish the story for yourself. No, no, please go on, Alice said very humbly. I won't interrupt again. I dare say there may be one. One indeed, said the Dormouse indignantly. However, he continued on. And so these three little sisters, they were learning to draw, you know. What did they draw? Said Alice, quite forgetting her promise. Treacle, said the Dormouse, without considering it at all this time. I want a clean cup, interrupted the Hatter. Let's all move one place on. He moved on as he spoke, and the Dormouse followed him. The March Hare moved to the Dormouse's place, and Alice rather unwillingly took the place of the March Hare. The Hatter was the only one who got any advantage from the change, and Alice was a good deal worse off than before, as the March Hare had just upset the milk jug onto his plate. Alice did not wish to offend the Dormouse again, so she began very cautiously. But I don't understand. What did they draw? Where did they draw the treacle from? You can't draw water out of a water well, said the Hatter. You can draw water out of a water well, said the Hatter. So I think you should draw treacle out of a treacle well, stupid. But they were in the well, Alice said to the Dormouse, choosing not to notice that last remark. Of course they were, said the Dormouse. Well in. This answer so confused poor Alice that she let the Dormouse go on for some time without interrupting him. Her brain has been broken. They were learning to draw, said the Dormouse went on, yawning, rubbing its eyes, for it was getting very sleepy, and they drew all manner of things, everything that began with the letter M. Why with an M? Why not? Said the March Hare. Alice was silent. The Dormouse had closed its eyes, and by this time was going off into a doze, but upon being pinched by the Hatter, woke up again, with a little shriek, and went on. That began with an M, such as mousetraps, and the moon, and memory, and muchness. You know, you say things are much of a muchness. Did you ever see such a thing, of a drawing of a muchness? Really now, you ask me, said Alice, very much confused. I don't think. Then you shouldn't talk, said the Hatter. This piece of rudeness was more than Alice could bear. She got up with a great disgust, and walked off, and the Dormouse fell asleep instantly, and neither of the others took the least bit of notice of her going, though she looked back once or twice, half hoping they would call after her. The last time she saw them, they were trying to push the Dormouse into the teapot. At any rate, I'll never go there again, said Alice, as she picked her way through the wood. And this is the stupidest tea party I've ever been to in all my life. Just as she thought this, she noticed that one of the trees had a door leading right into it. That's very curious, she thought. But everything's curious today. I think I might as well go in at once. And she went. One moment she found herself in a long hall, and close to a little glass table. Now I'll manage better this time, she said to herself, and began taking the little golden key and unlocking the door which led into the garden. She then set to work on nibbling at the mushroom. She had kept the piece in her pocket, till she was about a foot high, and then she walked down the little passage, and then she found herself at last in the beautiful garden, among the bright flower beds and the cool fountains. Ooh, raid. Ooh, raid. Teddy! Hi, Teddy! I will definitely hydrate. I just finished the chapter. How was your stream? How did Dave the Diver go? Oof, yes, all the health checks. Hello, if anybody has stuck around and does not know me, I'm Gin. I'm a variety streamer, and right now I'm reading Alice in Wonderland. We are on chapter 9, I think. She has just gotten into the garden. Wonderful. But yes, Teddy is awesome, and we love her. So if you aren't following Teddy, you should do that, because Teddy's great. No worries. Thank you for the raid, and thank you for stopping by. I appreciate it. Okay. Chapter 8. Queen's Croquet Croquet Ground. I read it as garden. A large rose tree stood near the entrance of the garden. The roses growing on it were white, but there were 3 gardeners at it, busily painting them red. Alice thought it was a very curious thing, so she went nearer to watch them. And just as she came up to them, she heard one of them say, "Look out now, Five! Don't go splashing paint all over me like that." "I couldn't help it," said Five in a sulky tone. "Seven jogged my elbow." On which Seven looked up and said, "That's right, Five, always lay the blame on others." "You'd better not talk," said Five. "I'd heard the Queen say only yesterday you deserved to be beheaded." "What for?" was the one who had spoken first. "That's none of your business, Two," said Seven. "Yes, it is his business," said Five, "and I'll tell him. It was for bringing the cook tulip roots instead of onions." Seven flung down his brush, and it had just begun. Well, all the unjust things, when his eye chanced upon Alice, as she stood watching. Them, and he checked himself suddenly. The others looked around also, and they all bowed low. "Would you tell me, please," said Alice, a little timidly, "why are you painting those roses?" Five and Seven said nothing, but looked at Two. Two began in a low voice. "Why, the fact is, you see, miss, this here ought to have been a red rose tree, and we put a white one here by mistake, and if the Queen were to find out, she would have all our heads cut off, you know. So you see, miss, we're doing our best, afore she comes to—" At this moment the Five, who had been anxiously looking across the garden, called out, "The Queen! The Queen!" and the 3 gardeners instantly threw themselves flat upon their face. There was a sound of many footsteps, and Alice looked round, quite eager to see the Queen. First came 10 soldiers carrying clubs. Those were all shaped like the 3 gardeners, oblong and flat, with their heads and feet at the corners. Next to the 10, courtiers, that's the word. These were ornamented all over with diamonds, and walked 2 and 2, as the soldiers did. After these came the royal children. There were 10 of them, and the little dears came jumping merrily along hand in hand, in couples, and they were ornamented with hearts. Which, fun fact, Alice's family was rather large. Like, the real Alice, the real little family, probably, yeah, at this point, would have been close to 10 children. So I think that was a little nod to her actual family. And I might have used this for a jumping off point for something, which I may or may not get published in the future. We'll see. Next came the guests, mostly kings and queens, and among them Alice recognized the White Rabbit. It was talking in a hurried, nervous manner, smiling at everything that was said, and went on by without noticing her. Then followed the Knave of Hearts carrying the king's crown on a crimson velvet cushion. And last of all, the grand procession came the King and Queen of Hearts. Alice was rather doubtful whether she ought not to lie down on her face like the gardeners, but she could not remember ever having heard such a rule at the processions. And besides, what would be the use of a procession, thought she, if people had to lie down on their faces, so they couldn't see it? So she stood where she was and waited. When the procession came opposite to Alice, they all stopped and looked at her. And the queen said, severely, "Who is this?" She said, to the Knave of Hearts, who only bowed and smiled in reply. "Idiot," said the queen, tossing her head impatiently, and turning to Alice as she went on. "What's your name, child?" "My name's Alice, so please, your majesty," said Alice very politely, but she added to herself, "Why, they're only a pack of cards after all. I needn't be afraid of them." "And who are these?" said the queen, pointing to the three gardeners who were lying round the rose tree. For you see, as they are lying with their faces and the pattern on the backs were the same as the rest of the pack, she could not tell they were the gardeners or soldiers or courtiers or three of her own children. "How should I know?" said Alice, surprised at her own courage. "It's not business of mine." The queen turned crimson with fury, and after glaring at her for a moment like a wild beast, began screaming, "Off with her head! Off the—" "Nonsense!" said Alice very loudly and decidedly, and the queen was silent. The king laid his hand upon her arm and timidly said, "Consider, my dear, she's only a child." The queen turned angrily away from him and said to the knave, "Turn them over." The knave did so, and very carefully with one foot. "Get up," said the queen, in a shrill, loud voice, and the three gardeners instantly jumped up and began bowing to the king, the queen, and the royal children, and everybody else. "Leave off that!" screamed the queen. "You make me giddy." And then turning to the rose tree, she went on, "What have you been doing here?" "May it please you, your majesty," said the two in a very humble tone, going down on one knee as he spoke. "We were trying—" "I see," said the queen, who was meanwhile been examining the roses. "Off with their heads!" And the procession moved on. Three of the soldiers remaining behind to execute the unfortunate gardeners, who ran to Alice for protection. "You shan't be beheaded," said Alice, and she put them into a large flower pot and stood near. The three soldiers wandered around for a minute or two, looking for them, but then quietly marched off with the others. "Are their heads off?" shouted the queen. "Their heads are gone, if you please, your majesty," the soldiers sounded in reply. "That's right," shouted the queen. "Can you play croquet?" The soldiers were silent and looked at Alice, as the question was evidently meant for her. "Yes," shouted Alice. "Come on, then," roared the queen, and Alice joined the procession, wondering very much what would happen next. "It's a very fine day," said a timid voice at her side. She was walking by the White Rabbit, who was peeping anxiously into her face. "Very. Where's the Duchess?" "Hush, hush," said the rabbit in a low, hurried tone. He looked anxiously over his shoulder as he spoke, and then raised himself upon tiptoe and put his mouth close to her ear and whispered, "She's under sentence of execution." "For what? Did you say? What a pity?" the rabbit asked. "No, I didn't. I didn't think it's at all a pity. I said, what for? She boxed the queen's ears, the rabbit began. Alice gave a little scream of laughter. Oh, hush, the rabbit whispered in a frightened tone. The queen will hear you. You see, she came rather late, and the queen said, get to your places, shouted the queen in a voice of thunder, and the people began running about in all directions, tumbling up against each other. However, they got settled down in a minute or two, and the game began. Alice thought she had never seen such a curious croquet ground in her life. It was all ridges and furrows, and the croquet balls were live hedgehogs, and the mallets were live flamingos, and the soldiers had to double themselves up to stand on their hands and feet to make the arches. The chief difficulty Alice found at first was in managing her flamingo. She succeeded in getting the body tucked away comfortably enough under her arm with the legs hanging down, but generally, just as she had to get its neck nicely straightened out, that was going to give the hedgehog a blow with its head. It would twist itself around to look up at her face with such a puzzling expression that she could not help bursting out laughing. And when she got its head down and was going to begin again, it was very provoking to find that the hedgehog had unfolded itself and was, in a way, in an act of crawling away. Besides all this, there was generally a ridge of a furrow and a way whichever she wanted to send the hedgehog. And as the doubled-up soldiers were always getting up and walking off in other parts of the grounds, Alice soon came to the conclusion that it was a very difficult game indeed. The players all played at once, without waiting for turns, quarreling all the while and fighting with the hedgehogs. In a very short time, the queen was in a furious passion and was stomping about and shouting, off with her head, off with his head, about once a minute. Alice began to feel very uneasy, to be sure. She had not yet had any dispute with the queen, but she knew that it might happen any minute. And then, thought she, what would become of me? They're dreadfully fond of beheading people here, and it's a great wonder there's anyone left alive. We'll get to that in a minute. She was looking about in some way to escape, and wondering whether she could get away without being seen, when she noticed a curious appearance in the thin air. It puzzled her very much at first. But after watching it a minute or two, she made it out to be a grin. And she said to herself, it's the Cheshire Cat. Now I shall have somebody else to talk to. How are you getting on? Said the cat, as there was mouth enough for it to speak. Alice waited till the eyes appeared, and then nodded. It's no use speaking to it, she thought, till its ears have come. Or at least, one of them. In another minute the whole head appeared, and then Alice put down her flamingo and began to account the game, feeling very glad she had someone to listen to her. The cat seemed to think this was enough of it now in sight, and no more of it appeared. I don't think they play all that fairly, Alice began in a rather complaining tone. And they all quarrel so dreadfully, one can't hear oneself speak. And they don't seem to have any rules in particular, at least if there are, nobody attends to them. And you've no idea how confusing it all is. Things being alive, for instance. There's the arch I've got to go through next, walking about on the other end of the ground, and I should have croqueted the queen's hedgehog, but just now it only ran away when it saw mine coming. How do you like the queen? The cat said in a low voice. Not at all, said Alice. She's so extremely... Just then, noticing the queen was close behind her. Listening, she went on, likely to win, and that it's hardly worth finishing the game. The queen smiled and passed on. Who are you talking to? Said the king, coming up to Alice and looking at the cat's head with great curiosity. That's a friend of mine, the Cheshire Cat, said Alice. Allow me to introduce it. I don't like the look of it at all, said the king. However, it may kiss my hand if it likes." "I'd rather not," said the cat. "Don't be impertinent," said the king, "and don't look at me like that." He got behind Alice as he spoke. "A cat may look at a king," said Alice. I've read that in I've read that in some book, but I don't remember where." "Well, it must be removed," said the king, very decidedly, and he called to the queen, who was passing it at the moment. "My dear, I wish you would have this cat removed." The queen had only one way of settling all the difficulties, great or small. "Off with his head," she said without even looking round. "I'll fetch the executioner myself," said the king eagerly as he hurried off. Alice thought she might as well go back to see how the game was going, as she heard the queen's voice in the distance, screaming with passion. She had already heard her sentence 3 of the players to be executed for having missed their turns, and she did not like the look of things at all, as the game was in such confusion that she never knew whether it was her turn or not. So she went in search of the hedgehog. The hedgehog was engaged in a fight with another hedgehog, which seemed to Alice to be an excellent opportunity for croqueting one of them with the other, and the only difficulty was that her flamingo had gone across to the other side of the garden, where Alice could see. I will check that in a minute. Where Alice could see it trying, in a helpless sort of way, to fly up into a tree. By the time she had caught the flamingo and brought it back, the fight was over, and both of the hedgehogs were out of sight. But it doesn't matter much, thought Alice, as all the arches are gone from the side of the ground. So she tucked it away under her arm so that it might not escape again, and went back to have a little more conversation with her friend. When she got back to the Cheshire Cat, she was surprised to find quite a large crowd collected round it, and a dispute was going on between the executioner, the king, and the queen, who were all talking at once. While all the rest were silent and looked very uncomfortable, the moment Alice appeared, she was appealed to by all 3 to settle the question, and they repeated the arguments to her. Though they all spoke at once, she found it very hard to make out exactly what they said. The executioner's argument was that you couldn't cut off a head unless there was a body to cut it off from, and then he never had to do such a thing before, and it wasn't going to begin at his time of life. The king's argument was that anything that had a head could be beheaded, and that you were talking nonsense. The queen's argument was that if something wasn't done about it in less than no time, she'd have everybody executed all around. It was the last remark that had made the whole party look so grave and anxious. Alice couldn't think of anything else to say, but "It belongs to the Duchess. You'd better ask her about it." "She's in prison," said the queen to the executioner. "Fetch her from here." And the executioner went off like an arrow. The cat began fading away for a moment. The cat's head began fading away the moment he was gone, and by the time he'd come back with the Duchess, it had entirely disappeared. So the king and the executioner ran wildly up and down, looking for it, while the rest of the party went back to the game. All right, let's do one more chapter. But we'll take a little break, and I will sip things. Hi. Hi, Doc. Compliments for you, my bestest best Twitch friend, who is so cool and so fun, and I adore you. Compliments for you, who I want to be happy, and I totally saw that you gave me a present, but I'll open it after stream, and I totally didn't get you anything earlier today in Steam yelling at me. Absolutely not. But yeah, I'm so glad you're my friend and that I know you and that you're always asking me to do stuff with you. It's really fun and I think you're really neat. And I'm glad you're my friend because I think you're really cool. Thank you for always wanting to hang out with me. No cry. I mean it. Yes, sweetie. Oh, good. Oh, good. Yeah, my bombings are going to be on Christmas. Just a heads up to a good chunk of my friends list. But I will actually we'll do, I want to see while you're here. I want to see what we got. Um, what happened? What happened to? What is my gift? What is my gift? Ah! Thank you! I've been meaning to get into this series forever! Yay! Oh, that is super cool! Thank you so much! I legitimately put part of the series on my wish list. Oh, thank you. Oh, that's why. Ooh, nice. Which actually let me change the thing for the other one too. Thank you, Weedy. I appreciate that. Okay, that one's fine. Let's get that one off of there. Okay, that should be all of my screens. Cool beans. Thank you for the heads up, Weedy, and thank you, Doc. That is super cool. I really appreciate that. Yeah, I am super excited. Thank you so much. All right. Let's do one more chapter. Chapter 9. The Mock Turtle's Story. You can't think of how glad I am to see you again, you dear old thing, said the Duchess, as she tucked one of her arms affectionately into Alice's, as they walked off together. Alice was very glad to find her in such a pleasant temper, and thought to herself that perhaps it was only proper. It was only the pepper that made her so savage when they met in the kitchen. When I'm a duchess, she said to herself, not in a very hopeful tone, I won't have any pepper in my kitchen at all. Soup does very, very well without. Maybe it's always pepper that makes people hot-tempered, she went on, very much pleased at having found a new kind of rule. And vinegar that always makes them sour, and chamomile that always makes them bitter, and barley sugar, and things that make children sweet-tempered. I only wish people knew that, or they wouldn't be so stingy about, you know. She had quite forgotten that about the Duchess by this time, and she was a little startled when she heard the voice so close to her ear. You're thinking about something, my dear. Oh no! Okay, it says we're back. Uh it wouldn't be one of my streams without the internet dying. Don't mind me, my internet died. Anyway, da-da-da-da. You're thinking about something, my dear, and that makes you forget to talk. I can't tell you just I can't tell you just now what the moral of that is, but I shall remember it in a bit, said the Duchess. Perhaps it hasn't one, Alice ventured to remark. Tut tut, child, said the Duchess. Everything's got a moral, if you can only find it. And she squeezed herself up close to Alice as she spoke. Alice did not like her keeping so close to her, because the Duchess was very ugly, and secondarily, because she was at exactly the right height to rest her chin on Alice's shoulder, and it was very uncomfortable. and it was an uncomfortably sharp chin. However, she did not like to be rude, so she bore it with all that she could. "The game's getting rather better now," she said, by way of keeping up the conversation a little. "'Tis so," said the Duchess. "And the moral of that is, oh, 'tis love that makes the world go round." "Somebody said," Alice whispered, "that it's done by everybody minding their own business." "Alice can be savage, too." "Ah, well, it means much the same thing," said the Duchess, digging her sharp little chin into Alice's shoulder, as she added, "and the moral of that is, take care of the sense, and the sounds will take care of themselves." How fond she is of finding morals in things, Alice thought to herself. "I dare say you're wondering why I didn't put my arm around your waist," said the Duchess, after a pause. "The reason is, I'm doubtful about the temper of your flamingo. Shall I try an experiment?" "He might bite," Alice cautiously replied, not feeling all that anxious to have the experiment tried. "Very true," said the Duchess. "Flamingos and mustard both bite, and the moral of that is, birds of a feather flock together." "Only mustard isn't a bird," Alice remarked. "Right as usual," said the Duchess. "What a clear way you have of putting things." "It's a mineral, I think," Alice said. "Of course it is," said the Duchess, who seemed to be ready to agree with everything that Alice said. "There's a large mustard mine near here, and the moral of that is, the more there is of the mine, the less there is of yours." Yeah, the more there is of mine, yeah, the less there is of yours. "Oh, I know," exclaimed Alice, who had not attended to the last remark. "It's a vegetable. It doesn't look like one, but it is." "I quite agree with you," said the Duchess. "And the moral of that is, be what you would seem to be, or, if you'd like it put more simply, never imagine yourself not to be otherwise than what it might appear to others, what you were, or might have been, or otherwise than you would have been, to appear to them to be otherwise." "I think I should understand that better," Alice said very politely, "if I had it written down, but I can't quite follow when you say it." "There's nothing to what I could say if I choose," the Duchess replied in a pleased tone. "Pray, don't trouble yourself to say it any longer than that," said Alice. "Oh, don't talk about trouble," said the Duchess. I make you a present of everything I've said as yet." A cheap sort of present, Alice thought. I'm glad people don't give birthday presents like that. But she did not venture to say out loud. "Thinking again?" the Duchess asked, with another dig of her sharp little chin. "I've a right to think," said Alice sharply, for she was beginning to feel a little worried. "Just about as much, right? As pigs have to fly, and the But here, to Alice's great surprise, the Duchess's voice died away, even in the middle of her favourite word moral, and in the arm of that was linked to hers began to tremble. Alice looked up, and there stood the Queen in front of them, with her arms folded, frowning like a thunderstorm. "A fine day, your Majesty," the Duchess began in a low, weak voice. "Now I give you fair warning," shouted the Queen, stamping on the ground as she spoke. "Either you or your head must be off, and that is in about half of no time. Take your choice." The Duchess took her choice, and was gone in a moment. "Let's go on with the game," the Queen said to Alice, and Alice was much too frightened to say a word, but slowly followed her back to the croquet ground. The other guests had taken advantage of the Queen's absence and were resting in the shade. However, the moment they saw her, they hurried back to the game, the Queen merely remarking that the moment's delay would cost them their lives. After all the time playing, the Queen never left off quarreling with the other players, and shouted, "Off with his head!" or "Off with her head!" Those whom she sentenced were taken into custody by the soldiers, who of course had to leave off being arches to do this, so that, by the end of half an hour or so, there were no arches left, and all the players, except for the King, Queen, and Alice, were in custody under the sentence of execution. Then the Queen left off, hurriedly out of breath, and said to Alice, "Have you seen the Mock Turtle yet?" "No," said Alice. "I don't even know what a Mock Turtle is." "It's the thing Mock Turtle soup is made from," said the Queen. "I never saw one or heard of one." "Come on, then," said the Queen, and he shall tell you his history." As they walked off together, Alice heard the King say in a low voice to the company generally, "You are all pardoned." "Come on, that's a good thing," she said to herself, for she had felt quite unhappy at the number of executions the Queen had ordered. They very soon came upon a griffin, lying fast asleep in the sun. If you don't know what a griffin is, look at the picture, because there is a nice little illustration of a griffin in the book. "Up, lazy thing," said the Queen, "and take the young lady to see the Mock Turtle and hear his history. I must go back and see after some executions I have ordered." And she walked off, leaving Alice alone with the griffin. Alice didn't quite like the look of the creature, but on the whole she thought it would be quite safe to stay with it as to go after the savage Queen, so she waited. The griffin sat up and rubbed its eyes and looked. Then it watched the Queen till she was out of sight, and then it chuckled. "What fun!" said the griffin, half to itself, half to Alice. "What is the fun?" said Alice. "Why, she," said the griffin. It's all her fancy that they never have execute they never execute nobody, you know. Come on." "Everybody says 'come on' here," thought Alice. So as she went slowly after it, I never was so ordered about all that before in my life. Never." They had not gone too far before they saw the Mock Turtle in the distance, sitting sad and lonely on a little ledge of rock, and, as they came nearer, Alice could hear him singing as if his heart would break. She pitied him deeply. "What is his sorrow?" she asked the Griffin, and the Griffin answered, very nearly the same words as before. "It's all his fancy, that he hasn't got no sorrow, you know. Come on." So they went up to the Mock Turtle and looked at him with his large eyes full of tears, but said nothing. "This here young lady," said the Griffin, "she wants to know your history. She do." "I'll tell it to her," said the Mock Turtle in a deep, hollow tone. "Sit down, both of you, and don't speak a word till I've finished." So they sat down, and nobody spoke for some minutes. Alice thought to herself, "I don't see how he can ever finish if he doesn't begin. Hello, kitty, kitty." 1 second, kitty, kitty crossing. While she gets settled, I'll check on chat. Okay, good. It looks like nothing else has been on fire. Hi. I've still got a little bit left to read. Are you gonna get settled? Hi. Hello. Hello. Oh, no. Do not walk on the keyboard. Do not. Hi. Please get off the laptop. Hold on. Come here. Yes, thank you. Goodbye. Well, not goodbye, but yeah, get off the laptop. Okay, okay, okay. There you go. There you go. Gonna, there you go. You gonna settle? Hi. Maybe. Possibly. Silly kitty. We're not that far off from this chapter, but wait, we are having a kitty break. Oh, okay, right there? Okay. Okay. We'll go with that. She has settled under my arm. Very comfortable armrest I now have. Okay. All right. Now, where were we? Oh, yes. Don't know how you can ever finish if he doesn't begin. But she waited patiently. Once, said the Mock Turtle at last, with a deep sigh, I was a real turtle. These words were followed by a very long silence, broken only by the occasional explanation of from the Griffin, who was constantly heave sobbing of the Mock Turtle. From the Griffin, and the constant heave sobbing of the Mock Turtle. Okay. Alice was very nearly getting up and saying, Thank you, sir, for your interesting story, but she could not help but thinking there must be more to come, so she sat still and said nothing. When we were little, the Mock Turtle went on, at last more calmly, though still sobbing a little now and then, we went to school in the sea. The master was an old turtle. We used to call him Tortoise. Why did you call him Tortoise if he wasn't one? Said Alice. We called him Tortoise because he taught us, said the Mock Turtle angrily. Really, you are very dull. You ought to be ashamed of yourself for asking such a simple question, added the Gryphon. And then they both sat silent and looked at poor Alice, who felt ready to sink into the earth. At last the Gryphon said to the Mock Turtle, Drive on, old fellow. Don't be all dry about it, or don't be all day about it. And he went on with these words, Yes, we all went to school in the sea, though you mayn't believe it. I never said that I didn't, interrupted Alice. You did, said the Mock Turtle. Hold your tongue, added the Gryphon before Alice could speak again. The Mock Turtle went on. We had the best of education. In fact, we went to school every day. I've been to school. I've been to a day school, too, said Alice. You needn't be so proud of all of that. With extras? Said the Mock Turtle a little anxiously. Yes, we learned French and music. And washing? Said the Mock Turtle. Certainly not, said Alice indignantly. Ah, then yours wasn't a really good school, said the Mock Turtle in a tone of great grief. Now, at ours, they had, and at the end of the bill, French, music, and washing. Extra. You couldn't have wanted it much, said Alice, living at the bottom of the sea. I couldn't afford to learn it, said the Mock Turtle with a sigh. I only took the regular course. What was that? Inquired Alice. Reeling and washing? Reeling and writhing, of course. Okay. Are you moving? Okay. Oh, you're back. Hello. Hello. What a short little interruption we are having. Here I thought you were repositioning yourself, and then no. We are right back to where we were. Oh. Oh, is it the ribbon? Is that what has your attention? Is it the ribbon that's the bookmark? Reading of and withering, of course, to begin with, the Mock Turtle replied, and then the different branches of arithmetic, ambition, distraction, uglification, and derision. I never heard of uglification, Alice ventured to say. What is it? The Griffin lifted up both of its paws in surprise. Never heard of uglifying, it exclaimed. You know what to beautify is, I suppose. Yes, Alice said doubtfully. It means to make anything prettier. Well, then, the Griffin went on, if you don't know what to uglify is, you are a simpleton. Alice did not feel encouraged to ask any more questions about it, so she turned to the Mock Turtle and said, What else did you learn? Well, there was mystery, the Mock Turtle replied, counting up the subject with his flappers. Mystery, ancient and modern, with seography, then drawing, and drawing. Master was an old conger eel that used to come once a week. He taught us drawing, stretching, and fainting the coils. What was that like? Asked Alice. Well, I can't show you myself, the Mock Turtle said. I'm too stiff, and the Griffin never learnt it. Hadn't time, said the Griffin. I went to the classical master, though. He was an old crab, he was. I never went to him, the Mock Turtle said with a sigh. He taught laughing and grief, and used to say, so he did, said the Griffin, sighing in his turn, and both creatures hid their faces in their paws. And how many hours a day did you do lessons? Said Alice, in a hurry to change the subject. 10 hours the first day, said the Mock Turtle, 9 the next, and so on. What a curious plan, Alice exclaimed. There's a reason they're called lessons, the Griffin remarked, because they lessen from day to day. This was quite a new idea to Alice, and she thought it over a little before she made her next remark. Then on the 11th day it must have been a holiday. Of course it was, said the Mock Turtle. And how did you manage on the 12th? She went on eagerly. That's enough about lessons, said the Griffin. In the Griffin interrupted in a very decided tone. Tell us something about the games now. And that is where we will leave off, because that will leave us on chapter 10. So next week I'll do chapter 10 through 12, and probably a little bit more commentary. Thank you all for joining me. I hope this was fun. Oh, I see that. It's been really fun. Hi, Chair. I will definitely hydrate. Thank you. Hi, Chair. It's good to see you. That was a good place to stop because I have finished my water bottle. And I filled this thing up. I've still got plenty of ice in it though, and that should melt. Yeah, there are two. And if people are interested, I absolutely will read Through the Looking Glass. Because this is pretty fun actually to try to do this. Pretty much. That is exactly the method that I was going for. Is it's water saved for later. But yeah, the plan is to I'll finish the last 3 chapters next week. Probably do a little just chatting to end off the year. And yeah, if people want me to read the sequel and then possibly some other things, I'd be willing to do that because I'm kind of enjoying this. It's a nice shorter stream. It's a nice shorter stream idea. So let us see. Let's see who's going. As we are just gonna end slightly. Alright, who is going now? Where can I send you all off to? Oh, I got a new follower? Was that Wheaty's friend? Who was a cool bean that I did not I need to fix my alerts. I did, okay. Thank you, Duo, for the follow. I appreciate it. I did not see that. Yay! That means I'm officially over 150. Yay! That's really cool. But yeah, let's see who is still going. No, that is super cool to me. Thank you all so much. You know, I'm gonna double check something real quick because I know who I want to raid, but I want to make sure that she's still gonna be going for a bit. So I'd hate to send you all over when she's ending. Okay, yeah, it looks like she's gonna go for a little while longer, so we'll do that. I'm gonna send you all over to Liv, who is working on art and working on emotes, and she is just a lovely person. So we'll do regular storytime raid without the spooky, because this isn't Higurashi. So we'll do that. And I hope everybody has a good rest of their day. And I'll see you all next week if you want to hear the end of the story. Thank you all so much. Bye!